Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Well, folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. It's lovely to have you back again. And it was nice to catch up with so many of you last week at Hampden at the Alapa conference. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. It was really nice. So many of you who enjoy the show and told me very flattering, very embarrassing, but also very, very flattering and humbling. Thank you very much. So in keeping, we've got something special for you. This week, we all know the headlines are everywhere about the ferry fiasco. And I was fortunate enough to contact in Australia Stuart Ballantyne, who's heavily involved in this. And I have an interview with him coming up shortly on the show to let you see exactly everything that went on in the fiasco that was the Ferguson Marine ferries. Enjoy that, and the panel will join me later in the show. So welcome, Stuart, from Brisbane in Australia. Thank you very much for joining us, and I should tell our viewers at such short notice as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Roddy. I'm happy to be here.
Good. Well, we'll have to ask about that boat behind you in a minute, but first maybe I could just tell us about the boat, and then I'll do a wee intro and actually all about you, if I may.
All right. Okay. That boat behind me is a ship that when I came to Australia when I was 14, and number 3 of 6 kids, migrant kids, and my dad used to be in Denny Shipyard in Dumbarton, and I went off to sea 2 years later, and this is the ship that I spent the first 4 years at sea. It was a passenger cargo ship that went from Melbourne and Geelong and Victoria up to the Central Pacific. And on the way back, it would bring phosphate. On the way up there, it would carry passengers, fuel, refrigerated cargo. It was a great ship, and it was built on the Clyde at Harland and Wolff. And it was a classic style of those years.
I suppose as Glaswegians, as fellow Glaswegians, it's in our DNA, shipping. It's something in the Clyde, there's something about it that's maybe why you are where you are. And if I could just give some background, Stuart, because it really is a fabulous biography. And if I miss anything, please forgive me. But you are, as I say, Glasgow born, you're now living in Australia. You'd be fair to call you an inventor, a designer, a multi-award winner, because for some of your designs on speed steel hull catamaran passenger car ferries, you've offered around. You're also the chair of the World Ferry Organization. I'm just making sure I don't miss anything here. Interferry, the World Ferry Safety Association, and you're also chair of the Sea Transport Corp, based in Brisbane and Singapore. And you're in the process at the moment of building 30 ferries for the Philippines, and you've done ships or designed ships and commissioned ships for about 46 different countries.
Yes,
have I missed out anything?
That's correct. Yeah. So I'm busy.
Well,
it keeps me out of mischief.
Yeah, and of course you know our good friend of this show, Alf Baird, another good marine man. But so ferries are your game. And you've had a very successful career out of that.
I have, and it's interesting you say that, Roddy, because the best ship designers actually that I've come across have been ex-seafarers. There were actually Scandinavian seafarers, 3 of them that I class as being the best ship designers in the world. And I'd like to say that one of them has passed away, unfortunately. And I think I'm in the top 3 at the moment, a Scotsman and 2 Scandinavians. But they were all, and we are all ex-seafarers, because we actually understand it. We understand the DNA of it. We understand what we want the ship to do. Naval architects come out of it with a degree, but they don't have to even go to sea on a ship. So that's not really in the DNA.
So you were brought up living on the Clyde in Dumbarton, and you left to go to Australia in the mid-60s?
The early 60s. My dad, who was a foreman shipwright at Denny's, and his dad before him was in Denny's. So but he could see that the place was about to collapse. So he wheeked us all off to Australia. And at those times, the parents paid £10. They had to stay for 2 years, and the kids came for nothing. And of course, I was number 3 or 6, and number 3 or 6 is terrific because they can never remember your name. So it's a nice way to be. So
you bring Watch's name with you. Bring Watch's name with you.
Right.
Bring him along.
That's right. But I was the first of the 6 kids to leave home. I went off to sea. I don't think anyone noticed. Actually, I disappeared to sea. So.
And but maybe that was your Clyde thing. Maybe because your shipbuilding background and genetics.
No, I can tell you it was in my DNA, because even before I left, for the 2 years before I left, I would sit down at Dumbarton Castle and I would watch these ships intently as they came down the Clyde and went back up the Clyde, and they were going to South America or India. And I had my Ian Allen books of ships, and I would score under the line where I saw those particular ships, and it was just fascinating. So that's what drew me in. It was in my DNA.
Yeah, and you're other great. You've never lost your love for Scotland, and obviously, like so many, you don't lose your accent either. You're a proud Scotsman.
That's correct. That's correct. And it was really interesting, Roddy, because I started developing these cat designs when I started my own company in '76. And I went back to Scotland, I think 77, 78. And I went to the Scottish Development Agency. And there was an American lady by the name of Sylvia Price from Texas. And I said, look, I've got a pal of mine. He's in a wee shipyard down at Bowling, near the end of the Fourth Clyde Canal. It was part of Scott's shipyard. And I said, I'm happy to give you my designs of these roll-on, roll-off passenger catamarans for nothing. I'll license all these designs, and it just as long as you keep that shipyard open, because he was a pal of mine. I went to school with him, and anyway, 2 or 3 weeks later, she said, "Mr. Ballantyne, we've checked this out. There is no future for these types of ferries anywhere in the world." I said, "Oh, okay, thank you." And the yard closed up there, and John Harden, my mate, went off to Canada and was working in a shipyard in Canada. Like a lot of the Scots ended up everywhere except for Scotland.
Yeah, that's a wee discussion we were having before we come on here, that one of our biggest exports is not whiskey and gin, it's our people. It's our best, the biggest resource, and we've made the world greater. But it's fair to say, without embarrassing you or any way, Stuart, you've gone on to be one of the world's leading designers of car ferries, catamaran type ferries, and we'll go into that for shortly. And that would be a fair assumption.
Yeah, I think it's a nice compliment, but I don't take it as an ego thing, because when people say, "Well, are you that clever?" I said, "No, I'm just lazy, and I figured out the easy way to do it." Because I don't think it's really all that clever, because when I sit and explain this, which I will be in Scotland in May the 12th, I'm doing a presentation at Strathclyde University on May the 12th on the unsinkable ferries with Professor Dracos Vassilos, because we've developed the unsinkable ferries, and we've been working for the last 4.5 years. This is a breakthrough for the world industry, and it is a Scottish-based, Scottish-designed, Scottish innovation. So we're actually doing the launch of that on May the 12th.
Once this is over, I'd like to speak to you about that, because there's something that might tie in with that. So I just want to be clear for our viewers. The ferries that you build, the South Sea, everyone's, the seas around Scotland are rough. The seas around the world are rough. Would it be fair to say the seas in the South Seas, or the China Sea, wherever you're building ships, are just as rough as the ships around the seas around Scotland? Would that be a fair? It's a
fair assessment. The first roll-on, roll-off passenger catamaran was a tiny wee thing, 35 meters, called the Philanderer 3, and we put it in across. We designed it in 1982, because it's 40 years ago, for goodness sake. And we found by the time we built it, it started in 84 between the South Australian mainland and Kangaroo Island. And it's a place called the Backstairs Passage because it's an a-hole of a place, right? It's just strong tides against strong winds and up to 4.5 meter high seas. And this very small vessel, the 35 meter Philander 3, went in there, and in the first year alone, it made 2.5 million profit. The second year was 4 million profit, and it then became the cornerstone of a group called the Sea-Link Group. And if you Google the Sea-Link Group at the moment, they have 135 ships, mainly in Australia, but they're involved in bus companies and everything else. It's a huge company now, but the cornerstone was a small, successful ferry company to Kangaroo Island.
And you designed those ships?
Yes.
And so, moving on, you linking all those things together, you love the sea, you're building a ferries, world-leading ferries, and this catamaran design you come up with. They run, they're less expensive to run than, from the point of view of the viewers, of conventional ferries, roll-on, roll-off ferries. They're much cheaper to run, am I right?
That's correct. That's correct. We designed, in 1989, we went broke because there was high interest rates at the time. It was the same in the UK, 18% interest rates, and our design company went broke, and we were just starting into shipbuilding, and we ended up buying, on vendors' terms, a small ferry company. And I thought, oh, here's a go. So we bought a little monohull. We designed a little monohull of 35 meters long, and we built it. It was what we call our SLV designs, and we got 26 cars on it. The year after, I did the first of the RoPax CAT designs, and of course we got 35 cars on the same length vessel with much higher speed. So that was in 1991. So since then we've developed, we've done tank testing and everything else, and you know, we've gone ahead because it actually beats anything around the place.
So it would be fair also to say, and I'm sorry to be so elongated here, but I want to set the stage before we move on to the main menu, shall we say. You just can't build ships, particularly passenger and car ferries, that don't pass stringent government regulations. And I would suggest that the regulations in Australia are as strong as anywhere else in the world. Would that again be a fair assessment?
That's correct. That's correct. We've got this. We've all got the same rules.
Yeah. So, pulling this all together, you design catamaran ferries, which are unique. They are cheaper to build. They're cheaper to run. They're better for the environment. They are as safe as anything. They can work in rough seas.
Yes.
And being a good patriotic Scot, you see the trouble that's going on in the Ferguson Marine Yard with these two ferries that the Scottish Government have, and you offered to help. You made yourself available. Would you like to tell us what you actually did to try and save us from this fiasco?
Well, when Jim McCall bought the yard, I thought it was great. Well, just before that, there was 2008. The SNP actually asked me to come to Scotland and give my opinion on Scottish shipbuilding using Nigbay and Kishon. Nigbay was at the time was an offshore oil rig building place up near Inverness, and Kishon was on the west coast. So in 2008, they paid me first class to come across there and give my opinion. And I thought, well, why are they asking my opinion? They said, because you're not involved with Scottish politics. Come across and do this. And I was so happy that someone was willing to listen. So I did a presentation called See Scotland. And I came across, I looked at Kishon, I looked at Nick Bray. I said, listen, you guys, you have 10 parts of a 10-part jigsaw. There is no use asking me about what should we do, because you've got the biggest customer in Europe. You have engineering faculties. You've got marine engineering. You've got hydroelectricity. You've got every part of this jigsaw, and you're asking me, what should we do? I said, this is a piece of cake. This is what you got to do. I said, but with CalMac, because at that stage, we owned and operated our own ferry companies. We now own and operate our own ports. And I said, well, what you have to do is you have to sack the board of CalMac, and get people in there that actually know what they're doing. Because if you run a board in anything, you have to have people around the table that actually are skilled to know what they're doing. You know, you have a legal person, a commercial person, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And of course, anyway, so I get down to Holyrood, full of enthusiasm and excitement. You know, here's Scotland finally going to move. And I went in there, and of course, the bureaucrats who escorted us in there, and there was Alf Baird and Roy Peterson and myself, my wife Stephanie, and there was a lady bureaucrat there called Judith Ainsley, who introduced us to Stuart Stevenson and a couple of other ministers. And I said, listen, guys, now when I consult for, it doesn't matter whether it's the government of Samoa or the government of anywhere else, there's two basic rules. One is that if you want me to come to a preconceived conclusion, I'm not your man. Number two, you may not like what I tell you, but I'll always tell you the truth. Okay, is that a deal? Yes, that's a deal. So I present this PowerPoint presentation, and halfway through it says, on slide number 21, sack the board of CalMac and replace all the board. And of course, immediately the senior bureaucrat, this Judith Ainsley, this red-headed woman, gets into gyrations and, ministers, don't listen to what Mr. Ballantyne's telling you, because I said, no. I said, I'm only telling you the truth. You know, I said, I deal with different companies, with different governments, different colored people, different religion people. I tell them all the same thing, just stick with the truth, you know. And no, don't listen to Mr. Ballantyne. We're undergoing studies here. I said, that's the standard bureaucratic answer globally for not making a decision. We're undergoing a study. We're undergoing a review. This is standard bureaucratic parlance. It's just nonsense. And anyway, so they gave me the flick, and I didn't hear any more from them. And of course, then comes along Jim McCall. He buys the shipyard, and he sends, to his credit, he sent two people out to see me. One was Keith Mitchell, the director, and the second was a guy called Liam Campbell, who was a production guy. And I took them over one of our local catamarans here, walked them through the structure. We spent 3 or 4 days in my office going through all of the design drawings, the costings. And they said, listen, this is dead easy to build in Ferguson's. This is dead easy, and at the same price as what you guys can do in Australia, because our labor price is very similar, you know, allowing for the exchange rates, etc. This is a piece of cake. So they went back very happy. And at the same time, CalMac went to Jim McCall and said, look, we've got these two big vessels, £100 million a piece, and you know, which is 801, 802 now, Glen Sannox. And I went across to Scotland at the time, and I sat with Jim and I said, listen, Jim, with a new crew, you know, new staff, a shed that isn't as good as it should be, my recommendation is don't do this, because these designs are orphans. And when you're trying to get a new building crew to build something strange, it's very difficult, and you will never make money. And the vessel is not resaleable, it's not redeployable. You're better sticking to what your guys have come out to Australia and have seen, and just stick to standard, good, modern designs. But Jim was, and I really like this guy. I think politically he was, you know, we have to do this for Scotland. We have to get a tick on the box. And Jim McCall unfortunately accepted those contracts and went ahead with them. But of course, as you know, the rest of the story ended up in tragedy.
Okay, but you foresaw this, and once again, just as you were talking about when you went to the Scottish Development Agency, they didn't listen to you. When you went to see the civil servants, they didn't listen to you. And here was Jim McCall, one of our most successful, brilliant entrepreneurs Scotland's ever seen.
Yes.
He doesn't have a shipping background, but anyway, so it went wrong. But even after it had gone wrong, you stepped in and tried to help.
Yes.
Again,
and we've taken this all the time. Now, you know, and my lovely wife, she said, "Look, you keep going back like a pilgrimage." The Scotland said, "Look, guys," and I've sold these designs to all over the world, and when people do their assessment economically or operationally, they say, "Hey, these are a good design. Let's go for this." And I go back to Scotland, my native Scotland, and they say, "No, we don't like these because these will never work, you know."
Don't get ideas above your station.
That's about right, Roddy. It was just about right. Yeah, how dare you step out of your station?
Yeah.
You've been in the heat too long. The sun's melted your heat.
But you tried to bail them out again.
Yes.
And you made a fantastic offer, didn't you, about leasing ships to them?
Yes. Now we said, look, even these latest ones, you know, with two of 450 passengers and 100 cars for 105 million pounds. I said, listen, we could do that standing on our heads, but instead of building in Turkey, I said we would build the hulls somewhere without one of our licensed builders, just the hulls, and we would bring it to Port Glasgow, and we would fit out the rest within the same budget. But we would use Scottish tradesmen, you know, with the plumbing, the carpenters, the electricians, the communications guys, so that we get training and skills training. Because I'm a great believer in that, you know.
Yeah, and reviving the Clyde, which is
absolutely. Absolutely.
But again, it fell on deaf ears.
Yes.
And you could have done, and still could, save. So what did you do? You then wrote to the finance minister to say, look, don't do this folly.
Yeah, that's right. That was a year ago to Kate Forbes, but I mean, I think that they're protected by so many layers of bureaucrats that they don't bother to write back to people like me.
Yep.
I'm just and you know, I'm like you, Roddy and Peter. You know, you look back at Scotland and say, well, look, I'd love to help the place. And in a case like mine, I can help them. And certainly where there's thousands, I mean, tens of thousands of work opportunities there if they did it right. And one of the interesting things, Rod, is that this is 40 years later. We did the first roll-on, roll-off passenger one we did to Kangaroo Island in South Australia in 1984. We designed it in 82. This is 40 years ago. And what we did with that island when the vessel went in there in 84, it reopened the island to tourism. It reopened the abattoirs. It took the government, they had a big government 80-meter monohull with 29 crew with a 10 million a year subsidy, and they got rid of that. And this small catamaran ferry opened up the island, opened up the job opportunities. The kids didn't go to the main city of Adelaide anymore. They stayed on the island, and the island grew. And this was a classic case. This is 40 years ago. And what we're saying is, listen, if you do this in Scotland, you know, we think that some of the services, and we've been across there almost every year, except for the last couple of years of COVID. And I just despair to see some of these island routes with 3.5 miles of cars queued up, waiting to try and get on a ferry, because the people who put in the ferries just haven't catered or designed it for peak loads.
Yeah, and it's not cheap either. It's not cheap.
No.
And so, am I right in saying, if I've read it all the things together. So for the price of the 2 ships that are lying doing goodness knows what in Port Glasgow and these 2 new ones in Turkey, you could have replaced the entire fleet of Caledonian McBrain on a leasing deal and given us ships that are faster, as safe as anything, more green, less expensive to run, more profitable for the ship, which begs the question, why wouldn't anyone grab that? What are you and I missing, Stuart? Tell me.
Well, it's a bit like when you try and tell somebody their baby's ugly. You know?
I try not to do that.
No, that was funny because when you say, well, look, you know, and there's the way you do design, ship design, I can tell you, we did a clean sheet approach to design. We said, okay, what is it you're trying to do? Now, the CalMac model, and apart from nostalgia, I love how they do it because they'll take the last general arrangement drawing and they'll say, okay, Callum, what do you think, Donald? Oh, I think this next one will rake the funnel a wee bit and we'll, you know, maybe put another passenger deck here. At the moment, it's another crew deck because the crew, the RMT, need a crew cabin each with full facilities and, you know, 29 of those. Even if they don't go home at night, they're in their home port and they live 100 meters up the road, but they don't go home. We don't do that in day ferries anywhere else in the world. Yes, of course, if it's an overnight 24 hours, but of course, CalMac is not that. And so RMT's got a bit of a tight grip on them at the moment, which is a bit of a shame. And you don't have any ministers strong enough to, or with spine enough to say, well, okay, this is just nonsense. We can't afford this nonsense anymore.
And ongoing, if the government come back to you, a Scottish government come back to you, you would be willing to give your world-leading expertise, advice and designs to help your native country. Am I right?
Absolutely. You know, even I've just gone back to CalMac themselves and said, look, for £105 million sterling, that we would build 2 vessels of 450 passengers, 100 cars, but we would build them, the hulls overseas, and all the balance of the fit out in Port Glasgow. But we had suggested, the problem was that with Ferguson's, the sheds they'd built were actually quite skinny. They were all built for monohulls. And why inch green is so important to me anyway, as a clean sheet approach. I said, well, inch green's sitting along the road there, so you could use the same labor and just put some gantry cranes over that and some retractable roof arrangements. Roddy, when I left, when the family left Scotland in the early 60s, the reason why the old man was getting concerned because they were trying to build ships in Scotland up on a slipway in the open, in the snow, the hail, the rain.
The summer weather, you mean?
Yes, right. And where already the Japanese, the Koreans were building undercover in a dock, you know, with temperature control and everything else. And, you know, I don't know how they did the communications those days, but the old man knew that this, you know, this shipyard was going to go down the gurgle. Denny's, with an impressive 120-year track record, this place is going to go down the gurgle, as with all the other Scottish shipyards. And at the time, nobody was putting any money back into Scotland, and especially that Ted Heath, which, you know, I was just getting involved with observing politics at the time in the early 70s when Ted Heath closed all of the Upper Clyde shipyards, which I thought was a disgrace. And thousands of guys out of work. And immediately, and in fact, I put a YouTube out not long ago with saying you should not do this, because I was in Scotland in the early 70s when Heath closed the Upper Clyde shipyards and thousands of guys are out of work. And immediately I saw, if I hadn't been there, I wouldn't have believed it. But immediately I saw domestic violence, home invasions,
Yeah.
and suicides. And I said, now that's why you don't do lockdowns, you know.
Yeah.
And I was protesting against the Australian government doing lockdowns and the New Zealand government. Anyone that would listen, don't do this because it creates more problems than COVID problems, you know.
The other thing, moving on to this, when your designs were presented, there was some mistakes, shall we say, made about capacity, about tonnage, about all those sort of things, which were either malicious, e.g. corruption, or the wrong people are presenting these ships, am I right?
Yes, there was a fictitious catamaran design presented by CalMac saying, well, we viewed our latest monohull with the projected CalMac catamaran. And I don't know where they got that catamaran figures because it was sent through to me and said, well, does this represent reality? And when I looked at it and when went through, my office went through, this was just a piece of nonsense. Somebody fabricated this to make us look bad, or to make catamarans look bad.
Yeah.
And I don't know who was the author of that and why they would do it.
Yeah. So it's either stupidity or corruption.
That's one or the other, yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I know which one I would put my money on.
Yes,
Just as
but I don't think they're all corrupt. I think there's
no.
I think you know I've met a lot of people inside CalMac, and some of them are good. But the fact is that you know, whoever's leading the choir has to be bringing everyone else. So listen, we have to make a good ferry company great.
Yeah. Well,
At the moment, it's a not so good ferry company, and they're pulling it down.
Yeah, they're also thinking about selling it. So, you know, to have it failing is the great way to take something that's in the public ownership, is to make it really bad, makes it justifies the selling of it. As an old lefty myself, I'm opposed to all that sort of stuff of selling off public assets. But
are you a lefty?
I'm a lefty. Same when I play football. I used to play football when I play golf, all lefty. But the other thing you won't be surprised to hear, the Ferry Oversight Group has been disbanded by the Scottish Government. So in typical British fashion, no one's going to be held to account for this fiasco. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me because when bureaucrats, I mean, I've dealt with a lot of different governments, Roddy, around the world, and I can tell you, I don't care if they're what color they are, what religion they are, but the fact is that bureaucrats seem to protect themselves, and the last thing they need to do is expose their jobs by making a decision. So what they prefer to do is say, well, if we don't make a decision and we just deny everything will be all right in the night.
Yeah.
But the fact is that you need, in leadership, you need somebody with spine and say, this is good for the country.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have one of them. Unfortunately, we don't have one of them. Maybe one day soon. You never know. Stuart, can I thank you so much for coming in at such short notice and helping us and giving us your expertise and your the information was fantastic. And I'm sure the people out there now will be even more enraged at the nonsense that's going on. One of our finest, I mean, one of the things we're known best for, building ships, the greatest ships that sailed some of the seas were all Scots. The old story about if you shouted down into an engine room, "Hey, Jock," you get someone speaking back to you.
Absolutely, you know, and all the ships I sail with are Scots engineers, and you know, it was a pride. It was a very proud heritage, and that's why I get frustrated in my constant rejections from CalMac. I thought, oh, you know, I'm just trying to help these people. Anyway,
help your nation. That's what patriots do, Stuart. That's what patriots do. We're in it for the long haul. But Stuart, for the time, I hope you'll come back soon and have another chat with us. Thank you.
I shall be in Scotland in Strathclyde University on the 12th of May.
When you become a doctor, an honorary doctorship, and well-deserved.
An honorary doctorship, yes. But we're presenting This is a groundbreaking development. This is the unsinkable ferry design. We've been working with Strathclyde for the last 5 years on a solution which makes a vessel totally unsinkable, and we've finally got it through. So we were supposed to do it last year because of COVID. We couldn't do it, but we're doing it in Strathclyde. So I'll get you along. I'll send you an invite, Roddy. You're going to love it.
Well, I can say the other thing that's famous about Scotland and Glasgow in particular is our dry crew humour and wit. And I would just say that they told us the Titanic was unsinkable. Do you remember?
Yeah. Well, that was Irish built.
Well, they said it. Well, there's a great T-shirt in Ireland which said it was all right when it left here. So.
No, that's excellent. No, but the fact this is when you see this presentation, it's a 2-hour presentation on May the 12th at Strathclyde University.
Well, I will be in Scotland.
All sorts of people there from the Navy, from government, from CalMac. We've invited CalMac, and saying, well, okay, we've been working on this. Not only we've got the best designs in the world, but now they're unsinkable. And this is we're declaring that this is a Scottish innovation, Scottish engineering, and we should be not dismissing this. Our capabilities. We should be encouraging it.
Yeah. Well, there are people in the wings, trust me, Stuart, who are trying to.
I hope so.
Pull it together.
So. Roddy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart.
Cheers.
Hope you enjoyed that, folks. Stuart, very enlightening. And to help me discuss that and matters that are happening elsewhere, I'm joined by a panel. The first one I've got to say is that our Yvonne can't be with us. She's actually in Kabul in Afghanistan this week. And while last week we didn't have Big Iain with us, he's in Florida, he's back. But we're delighted to say that we're also Iain. Hello.
Hello there, Roddy. How are you?
Nice to see you, my friend. We're also joined, because we're discussing ferries, among other things. We thought that we should, with Yvonne not being here, take this opportunity to bring in through a Scottish Prism ferry, marine and all things marine expert, Professor Alf Baird. Alf, welcome back to the Prism.
Hello, Roddy. Hello, Iain.
You're on the other side of the camera this time, for want of a better phrase, here to help us look at stuff. Welcome. Nice to see you, Alf. And of course,
happy to talk about ferries, Roddy.
Well, that's it. Ferries. We're going to talk about ferries and fairies and unicorns and everything. We're going to have a whale of a time. And we've also got, of course, the Coatbridge Cavalier up there in Kathmandu, or whatever the heck he is now in India. Phil, my dear friend, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good, excellent. Well, Iain, we missed you last week. You were away doing other things, and we thought we'd bring you back. Nice to see you. Were you busy?
I was very busy. I've had a great week with my blog, with the various different ferry stories that I've been running. It just goes on, and I'm sure this programme will add to the interest, because it's very widespread. My numbers have been through the roof thanks to the issue. So it's good news all round, and I believe in this programme, when people hear everything that's been said, they'll be more optimistic, I think, about the future perhaps. But it's going to take a change of action from the government. They need to start doing something instead of sitting by and letting bureaucrats destroy the potential that Scotland's got.
Yeah. Well, that was good. Yeah, so we missed you. But
well, I hear you had an interesting time. I hear you were approached by someone who destroyed the eye candy image you have of yourself. Perhaps you should tell the watchers exactly what happened. It cheered me up no end.
Well, yeah, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, it was lovely to go to Hampden. It was lovely to meet so many people. There was a good buzz about, as they say in football parlance. And I had a lot of people come up tell me how much they enjoyed the show and how Prism was a good part. And one woman, and you know who I'm talking about, Margot, not that we'll mention you, said to me, "Oh, Roddy, I love the Prism show." She said, and I've got to tell you, you look better on the Prism show than you do in real life. There you go. It says, well, we've got a rough hide. That's why I've got the wrinkly skin, love. That's why it's wrinkly. It's tough rhino skin. So anyway, yeah, that was it. But it is heartening to know that people watch and appreciate what we're doing here. And no more so on a serious note, guys. And I want to come to you first, Alf, because, as I say, you are our marine expert. And I want to say thanks to you and a special mention to you, Iain, for bringing these blogs to the community. I think it was very important, and I doff my hat to you, sir. Thank you.
I often do it in the other direction.
And Alf, you saw my chat there with Stuart, who you know and you've been involved with. It was very enlightening, what's been going on, and also quite horrifying, is it not?
Yeah, well, I've known Stuart for, I think, 30 years now, since I used to, even as an undergraduate and also as a researcher, going to the World Ferry conferences back in the late 80s and early 90s. And the World Ferry Conference really taught us a lot about how to do things differently. And I would come back to Scotland and say, what the hang's going on here? And this is what Stuart does as well. He comes back to Scotland every year and says, guys, you could be doing things so much differently. And that's the reality. And I think I relate this very much to Robin McAlpine's article on Iain's blog today, is the board composition we have in Scotland is always the same. It's people that didn't ken what they're doing, essentially, with public assets. It's the same people that go this revolving door around the boards. And if you look at CMAL, CalMac, Transport Scotland, it's all the same kind of gadgets, if you know what I mean. And it's not, as Stuart says, and I think you mentioned to him, it's these boards didn't like people like us, the working class that maybe have new ideas or fresh ideas. So and it relates back to pretty much a lot of what I've been finding about internal colonialism and Hechter's division of labour, or cultural division of labour. Scotland still has that cultural division of labour, where all the people dealing with this ferries fiasco are largely, a lot of them aren't even Scottish, by the way. They're brought in here, and all the people brought in to repair Ferguson's from deepest, darkest Gloucestershire haven't got a clue about ferries or Scottish islands. So we just have the same problem over and over again. We don't use our own people to solve our problems. And the natives that are banished, of course, like Stuart, they're never welcome. You know, but so we really need to think about our reality, our predicament, which is quite obviously, it's a structural and cultural problem.
Yep. If I had our dear friend Phil Gareth here, he would make the same things about art, museums, etc. That again, the local Scots are pushed aside for people from south of the border. But on this thing, and I'm purposely saving Iain till the last year on this particular ferries incident, what Stuart exposed, I mean, there was a man who, I think it's suffice to say, he has no need to come back to Scotland. He's kept very busy in the Southern Hemisphere. He is swamped. He comes up and to say, this is wrong, warns them before they do it, warns them while they're doing it, and every step along the way, everything he said would go wrong has gone wrong. And even at the end, after being insulted, ignored, he still offers to help when they still go, no, we know best. And as I said to him during that interview, it was the old, don't get ideas above your station. You're Scottish after all. It's quite horrifying, everything that's going on, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was very, what an eye-opener, what a guy. I mean, the government or the bureaucrats and the government are just basically using people like Alf and Stuart as a veneer of credibility for what they're, and what was very poignant was when Stuart mentioned that if you're going to speak to me and you expect predetermined decisions, I'm not your man. Clearly that was the case. Mm-hmm. Clearly they wanted him to give them a nod and a wink to something they had already made a decision upon, because some quango somewhere or another had made the decision. I mean, I'm nowhere near, I'm not in the same league as Stuart Ballantyne, but again, I worked at Rosyth refitting military vessels. And also because of my experience in the oil and gas sector, I offered the Scottish Government my time, my services for free when BIFAB was folding. the Burnt Island prefab outfit, and I thought this is what I do as a commercial and contracts manager. I award companies like this projects and have done for BP and Shell, and I know it inside out. And no, thank you very much. We've got it covered. And the thing that gets me about this as well, I don't understand why the accelerated development of the islands that he spoke of very articulately, and particularly with Kangaroo Island just off Adelaide, which coincidentally might be my next port of call, next destination. Kate Forbes, of all people, would be all ears for that kind of development and that kind of rejuvenation, the essential rejuvenation of the island. And he talked about the big queues and, oh no, it's a real missed opportunity. It's actually verging on negligent. It's verging on negligence, and the closure of the shipyards is one of the major reasons for the extension and the extent of the Scottish diaspora. What a talent! All these talents, free, happy to contribute, and are not being listened to. It's a disgrace, Roddy.
Yeah. So, Iain, as a Clyde Bank boy, you know the shipyards as well as anyone. I mean, that your life as a child. I mean, you'll remember what Dumbarton Road was like when the gates opened on a Friday at 4 o'clock, or any day at 4 o'clock, 4:30, whatever it was. And to see the state of it now, and here was an opportunity, Iain, to revamp not just the Ferguson's yard. This was a possibility to get things going again, to bring some glory back to the Clyde. And while Phil's saying it could be, I would say not bordering it's negligence. There's a hint of corruption in it as well, is there not?
There certainly is. I mean, I thought very illuminating. The stories from my blog have eventually broken out into the mainstream media, but I thought the Scottish Government's response in the Daily Express summed it up. It said, "We do not recognise these allegations." There is no allegations that are presented with fact after fact after fact. Example after example after example. If they can't recognise it, we should really sack the lot of them. It's as simple as, you're right, Roddy. I come from Clydebank. I grew up in Clydebank. I remember John Brown's when it was employing, I think, almost 20,000 people in the one yard. It built the biggest liners. It built the best liners. Clyde built was a mark of real standards.
Absolutely.
And the most important thing, I think, Stuart mentioned in his interview, which maybe hasn't been picked up with everybody, is this presentation that he's doing in May with the University of Strathclyde for a new unsinkable boat ferry. I mean, that's an opportunity. And Stuart has a plan. That's the difference as well. He's suggesting that what we should be doing is tying Ferguson's in Port Glasgow up with the dry dock that's in mothballs there, putting a cover over the dry dock and building inside. And we would have a facility there that would allow us to be world leading with world leading designs. Now, I've grown up in Scotland and we've invented so many things in my lifetime, and I've had to watch them going abroad to get the investment, to get the startup and to take it forward. Yeah. We've got a history in this country of being expert shipbuilders. We have in Stuart Ballantyne a world-leading expert ship designer. For goodness sake, you don't need to be the brains of Scotland to work out we should be using those talents. We should be using these opportunities. And that's where we must go now. And we, the four of us and others, have got to put the maximum pressure on the Scottish Government to get them to completely, remove CMAL from the scene. I mean, they are people who, I wrote in my blog this week, the government are getting taken as fools, by fools. As Al says, these people have no knowledge at all why they're sitting on this board. There's not an islander, not a single islander sits in that board. But the islanders are the customer base for these ships. And it's an outrage that all the jobs for the boys are getting passed round while the actual customer need has been ignored. And it's huge. As Stuart mentioned, what they did with Kangaroo Island, rejuvenated rejuvenated that island. You know, it created new businesses, it created tourism. We need that in Scotland. You know, and Alf and Stuart have to get enormous credit for, in the face of, after constant rejection all the way along the line, after being proven right every step along the line, they're still getting ignored by a Scottish government that's supposed to be interested in developing Scotland. They're not. They don't take decisions. They leave it to others. You've got, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's shipbuilding, ferries, land reform, or anything. You know, they invite the factor of the Duke of Buccleuch to sit as an advisor when they're telling the punters out there, they're looking at land reform. We're not going to live long enough for that to happen if that's their advisors. I mean, they really need a boot up the backside. And, you know, we really need to get people angry about this because it's their children's future. It's their children's jobs that are being sold down the river.
Well, I don't think we need to get them angry. They should be angry, and that's it. Alf, one of the things towards the end of the interview that Stuart said that got me, that even after, as Iain pointed out, all the rejections, all the treating them with disdain and whatnot, he still said at the end, I can still save you and we can keep the jobs in Scotland. You don't need to go to Turkey. We'll have the hulls built elsewhere. Bring it all to Ferguson's yard. You can save the yards. You can save the Scottish jobs. You can probably create Scottish jobs and set up a whole new production line to do this for the whole of the fleet. And still they rejected them. Now, as a marine economist, I mean, what were you thinking when you heard that?
Well, the problem here, Roddy, is to some extent the politicians are the fall guys. The people really running the show is the civil servants and the officials of the quangos. And that's who's driving this boat, if you like. So when Stuart came over and back in 2008, that was set up by Roy Peterson. The meeting was arranged through Roy Peterson, who was formerly head of transport for Highlands Enterprise and a great economist on maritime issues as well. And we set up that meeting and we helped Stuart, and Stuart presented his case to basically build 50 to 100 new ferries in Scotland. This was back in 2008. And I had been doing some research as well for the Scottish Government at the time under Alex Salmon's leadership that was very ambitious about shipbuilding at that time. But the problem was, as soon as you went into a meeting, the civil servants kept on telling the minister, you can't do this, minister, you can't do that. And this was the problem. Even the ministers were always held back. Now, Keith Brown set up his expert ferry group, and how he explained it to me, he says, I'm getting fed up with ministers having to go to Holyrood to apologise for all the mistakes of the officials in CalMac and CMAL and Transport Scotland. I need them to, get on track. But try as we could, Roy Peterson and I couldn't change the culture, the mentality. And they just continued to order ridiculously expensive and crazy prototypes that CalMac always do. So it's this cultural block we have, and it's related to the officials. And it goes back to what Phil was saying. As soon as you come forward with ideas, you're just poo-pooed. Now, the Scottish Ferries Review that I was tasked and commissioned to do research in that back in 2008, 2009, 2010, and our recommendation was to go towards catamarans with Stuart, and we proved the economics of all that, and we showed that the Scottish system for the islands is underdeveloped. We have 30 ferries on CalMac's system. We actually need over 50 for that system to give the islanders better connectivity, higher frequency. That can all be done. We need another 20 ferries for Orkney and Shetland. We need about 100 new ferries in total. And we're doing things totally wrong. And the way to do this is exactly as Stuart says. Take inch green, cover it over, put a couple of gantries in, bob your uncle, off you go. You've got the designs. And what Stuart's saying about building the hulls in Asia, European yards have been doing that for years. Building the hulls in a lower cost country, bringing them here and doing 60 or 70% of the fit out here and all the higher value stuff. Do all that here and launch the boats here as Scottish boats, but take advantage of global economics and build the hull. The basic hull arrangement elsewhere is the best option. So the system's there. The solution is suggested, but we are being undermined. And we are being undermined continually by the administration, which is a colonial administration. And it puts in place all the wrong kind of people into Ferguson's, into CMAL, into CalMac, into Transport Scotland. None of them have a pro-Scottish agenda. They all have, if you like, an anti-Scottish agenda. And what I would like to see is actually a judge-led inquiry into the Ferguson debacle, because the key question for me is, did Scottish public agencies bring that shipyard down? That is the question. Did they intentionally bring that yard down? And let's remember that the last 4 yards that CMAL has dealt with in Germany and Poland, in Ferguson's twice, have all went bust after CMAL orders. And I expect the shipyard in Turkey that's got this order will soon come to the conclusion that CMAL is not an easy organisation to deal with. So I think there are serious questions have to be addressed here. Politicians are a bit of the fall guy. The real problem is behind them, and it's the administration, the civil service, the quangos. And what's their agenda? And was their agenda to bring this yard down?
It's Phil, quite a thing here from Alf.
Dynamite.
Yeah, a judge-led inquiry. It's not going to happen. Just as there should be a judge-led inquiry about COVID and how we handled it, and how there should be a judge-led inquiry about the debacle around the Alex Salmond trial, there should be a judge-led inquiry about what happened over the Rangers directors and the copious amounts of money we put out. That's not going to happen. That is what needs to happen. It's not going to happen. So what do we do, Phil?
Well, it's a corruption of the legal system. Just look at, I mean, who on earth, why is Julian Assange in prison? And closer to home, why did the Scottish courts imprison another journalist, Craig Murray, for a trumped-up charge in a similar situation where you think the wrong kind of people are putting input into these decisions. The wrong kind of people are empowered by these establishments. The thing about establishments, they're created by countries and organisations to represent the interests of the leaders or the drivers of that country. And our institutions are all geared towards London-centric, centrist, and they do not benefit the people of Scotland. We need new institutions or revamped institutions. Now, I'm a word of caution on this. I'm not an ideologically possessed individual. I think when you change something like the Western capitalist system, which is still the best system in the world for all its faults, you should do so very, very carefully and a wee bit at a time. But we certainly need to correct the faults in the legal system. We need to correct all these faults in our government, the quangos, and it's about time. I think we need a party that recognises that, and I think a party who puts that to the forefront of addressing these issues will do very well in the not too distant future as people, because the penny is beginning to drop. More and more people are understanding something is rotten here.
In the state of Denmark. Iain, I tend to agree with Phil here on this one. But it's right. But it would take a brave politician to actually stand up and say what really needs to be said. Because as I say, if Grousmeter was here with us, he would tell you in the arts it's the exact same. The indigenous Scots are pushed aside. In commerce, the Scots are, and we're seeing it here in Caledonian McBrain, it would take a huge leap of bravery to do this, would it not? But it does need to be done.
Well, I mean, of course it takes some bravery, it takes some insight, it takes some, support for innovation and development. But what's your alternative? We've been on for decades with this system. It's running our country in front of our eyes, down day after day. If we can't muster a few brave, decent politicians that are going to take this on, because I agree with Alf, I reckon that a lot of this does come through the civil service in the background. But I wouldn't give the politicians a free pass, because if I can see it and Alf can see it, they can see it. And they've done nothing about it. So that's where the public come in. That's where the electorate come in. We tell them, do something about this. I don't expect to be sitting in Parliament next time the election comes along. And then mean it. Actually, just move your vote away, and there's no safe seats. And I'll tell you, my experience of politics is when there's no safe seats, politics works. Because the minute you've got them scared for their job, they're going to work a lot harder and be
Correct.
a lot braver. You know,
Correct.
so what we need to do, I mean, I lived and grew up with the Labour Party weighing their vote, and they did absolutely nothing. And I thought when the SNP won, things would move. And to be fair, at the start they did. We saw, you know, real invention, real ambition. It was great. And that's where our renewable industries all came from during that period. You know, because Alex Salmond was very innovative about the way he tried to develop that. Sadly, since that time, we've gone into reverse. The new SNP is the Labour Party from the past, and they need the same shock as the Labour Party got if we're ever to move forward. Because, you know, I hope, and I actually blogged earlier on, I hope Nicola would watch this programme because she's been given an out here. If she gets in behind Stuart, if she jumps on this new invention, if she, you know, takes his suggestions about rebuilding, shipbuilding on the Clyde, doing it the proper way, she could emerge yet with smelling of roses. If she doesn't, if she's our usual stubborn head in the sand, you're not going to do it because I never thought it. Stand up.
But Iain, that's exactly what she has done.
Big fall.
But that's exactly what she has done. Even at the end, Stuart came in and said, look, don't go to Turkey. Act for the same money. I can do, you know, so much better. And you can keep jobs in Scotland. Now, as you say, she could have been smelling the roses. She could have, people like us could have been shut up. But she didn't have. She just kept, I know best. And she kept on. It's quite worrying. But what to bring all these things together, what's happening? Your other big thing, Alf, of course, is colonialism and imperialism. And this, set aside that this war in the Ukraine seems to have set off a reaction, a global reaction. Because only today, the Indian government turned around to a delegation from the United Kingdom, headed by none other than the coveted job of Pete Wishart, by Mr. Speaker himself, Lindsay Hoy, and a whole lot of those and such as those to go to India to tell them in no uncertain manner that they should toe the line and ignore the Ruskies and just listen to what America and Mother England's telling them. And for one, they got up and said, don't bother coming. We don't need you. You don't tell us anymore. Now, irrespective of what behind it, but it warmed my heart for those that had been colonised, Alf, telling their old coloniser, go and do one. None of your business. Did it not bring a smile to your face?
Well, I think what was really interesting in the last few months even is Caribbean islands. Basically telling the monarchy and the British Crown, the British state, we didn't want any part of that anymore. So and they just use a majority of the parliamentarians to make that legislation in their parliament. Now that struck me as saying, well, what's wrong with our majorities of parliamentarians? We've actually got two national majorities of MPs and MSPs. What's wrong with them saying, you know, this union's broken? Brexit just proved it. The enforced Brexit of Scotland, all the usual nonsense that we have to suffer from Boris the clown and his gang. And we've got basically two gangs now, one in London and one in Holyrood, ruling the roost. So that's what we should be doing. These nationalist politicians should be coming forward with the solution to withdraw Scotland from the treaty. We're not a colony constitutionally, but we have a colonial relationship. That's the problem. And to all intents and purposes, we are subject to all the features of colonialism, economic and political exploitation, cultural and linguistic imperialism, and all that goes with that. The end result is we are continuing to be an underdeveloped people, an underdeveloped nation.
Absolutely.
We don't maximize our potential. All the resources are sucked out. We get nothing back except high energy prices. We're fooled culturally, and we have, of course, in colonialism, there is, of course, the cultural mindset and these features which we have to overcome. So that's where we have to understand, essentially, as I've been saying continually over the last few years after my book Do Not, where I found the reality, is that independence is decolonization. And we have to understand what that means. And in that reality, there are only two entities in that, the colonized and the colonizer. One way or another, the people have to understand the wretchedness. They have to understand why everything seems to go bad. We end up with a mediocre meritocracy for a particular reason. The Scots are squeezed out. There's only certain kinds of Scots get elevated. It's the kind that go to Murrayfield and Twickenham maybe, but no Hampden, if you ken what I mean.
Yeah. Oh, we can be assured that no one in this group here will be elevated. Not going to happen. Nor do we want it. But Phil, you touched on it.
I can see my neck getting stretched quite soon.
Yeah, there is that. Yeah, but I can't. Sir Iain Lawson just doesn't sound right. Or Lord Boswell. Lord Boswell.
This is a true story.
There is a Lord Boswell.
This is a true story. When I stood in the Scadden by-election back in 1989, they sent up a Times reporter who was one of the laziest reporters I've ever come in. He used to come into our offices. I was in the Conservative Party at the time. And we'd written his press release for him, and it appeared verbatim in the Times the day after. And the day before polling, his article described me, and this is absolutely true, as Sir Iain Lawson, the Conservative candidate, and Donald Stewart, who was my Labour opponent, as Donald Stewart.
I would just like to put in the caveat here.
Absolutely true story.
The Prism show wants to take no responsibility for the word Conservative or being member of being used on this show. And we absolutely disassociate ourselves from such comments. Thank you. Anyway, Phil, you were talking about the global system. It's the best we've come up with so far. That's a debate for several shows. But it seems, I read a great Bloomberg article this week where they were referring back to, and it was talking about what's going on in Ukraine, but they were referring back to when the pistol was fired against the Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914. No one realised the consequences of what was about to happen. And by the end of that slaughter, mayhem, and everything that developed there, we had suddenly a universal suffrage in countries. We had the slaughtering of the Tsar and Tsarina and all the family. We had communism, we had Bolshevism. And at the end of the Second World War, we had what certainly people on the right would call communism, almost in the UK, with a welfare system, etc. Now, one of the things that the West did when this horrific war and act of aggression by Russia happened is they stuck in sanctions. But as we mentioned in this show a couple of years ago, the Russians and the Chinese have been buying up gold for a long while to protect themselves. But the best behaving currency since the sanctions against Russia in March was the ruble. There's something not going right with these sanctions, Phil.
Yeah, well, first
the stick isn't working so much.
No, it's not, and it's the cunning. It's Baldrick's cunning plan that America is implementing through its puppets in Europe, and the idiocy of this, the naivety of this, comes from about 8 years ago. America played its hand when it first threatened to remove Russia from the SWIFT system. So the Russians went back and said, "What are we going to do about this?" And the Chinese did the same. And the Chinese have invented their own SWIFT system called CIPS. The Russians have done the same, called SPFS. And it's been described as economists as a motorway that takes you from where you want to be to where you want to go. It just has very little traffic on it at the moment. It's just not used. And this game, the Russians have left substantial funds in European banks while they invaded Ukraine. Why? Why would you do that when you know the Americans have already threatened and the Europeans have already threatened to take the sanctions from you, to move sanctions and therefore take this money? Well, here's the thing. Contracts. The contracts for Russia to provide gas is in US dollars, as it is across the world. The petrodollar is what America protects. When currency went fiat in 1971 and gold stopped backing currency, the Americans supplanted that with oil. through a deal with the Saudi Arabia at the time, which was the biggest provider, one of the biggest providers, and Saudi agreed to sell everything through US dollars. All of a sudden, Russia invades, the European banks snatch the funds with the America's behest, and the Russians say, all right, you've done that. You've now breached contract. We no longer need to take dollars for this. You will now pay rubles. You will now pay rubles. And since we're removed from the SWIFT system, you're going to have to use either SIPS or SBSFS. The Russians are gaming this. They've figured this out, as have the Chinese. This has been coming for a long time. T-bonds have been bought up by the Chinese. Gilt-edge bonds have been bought up by the Chinese. The economic programs plural, you could have on this. You should watch what some of the economists are saying about this. I mean, look what the BRIC economies are doing. Who's not playing this game? Brazil, Russia, India, China, plus. It's worse than LBGT. It's BRIC, plus. Most of the world is not playing with this game. Why? The investment of China in Africa, the investment of China around the world. This is not going to end well for America. America run about, wait a minute, what's going on here? What happened there? They're not gaming it properly. And I would suggest you watch, or anybody watches Scott Ritter. He did the UN Weapons Inspector. He did a program, the Grey Zone podcast. It's a kind of left-wing podcast in America, Battle for Ukraine with ex-UN Weapons Inspector. And what Scott Ritter did was he checked all the PhDs of the advisors to Biden and Biden's team. And he said, these people are theorists and ideologues. They know nothing about Russia. All their PhDs talk about is despots and Putin being evil, and they get in and they don't know Russia, and they're devoid of realpolitik. And it's the same kind of people. You can see the same in Scotland. This is why they've made this mistake, and the Russians are out gaming them. And it's the same people that are running Scotland. The inner circle of the government, the ideologically possessed postmodernists that currently run Scotland. Biology doesn't matter. Science doesn't matter. I mean, it's the politics of children. These people live in the world of pink, fluffy unicorns dancing on rainbows. It's crazy.
Iain, Biden quite rightly tried to make up the shortfall that the pipe for oil has been switched off in Russia. So he's using up America's reserves. He's pledged to put a million barrels a day to stabilize the market and stabilize the price, which is great today. But come the end of this conflict, whenever that happens, America's going to have to replenish that. But surely then the price is going to, we're just putting off what's going to be a price rise and a shortage of oil later.
Well, the million barrels a day, by sheer coincidence, is expected to last until the midterm elections in November.
Funny that.
Well, that's a coincidence.
It's quite astonishing. But I mean, I think, with respect to what Phil's saying, I think you're over ambitious about and thinking that Russia are doing better than you think they are. They're not doing well. They're in trouble. The sanctions are hurting them. But I mean, I think you may be getting advised by Arthur Scargill, because thinking of an energy ban as we move into April, is precisely the mistake that Arthur Scargill made all those years ago. If you're going to go that tactic, you want to do it in October rather than in April, because there's going to be months and months when, if things really did get difficult, you've not got to worry so much about the heating element of energy. And
that's only a small percentage of it, Iain.
Sorry?
You still got to cook. You've still got to drive your cars. You've still got to drive your power stations.
We shouldn't underestimate how much energy is spent on heating. I mean, it's one of the big faults of politicians over the last 20 years. We should have been investing far more into insulating our homes.
For sure.
And that would have removed a lot of the requirement. I mean, you can, if you look at some of the modern houses now, the technology exists not to really need very much energy. Heat it all year round. So, I mean, a lot more could have been done that, because insulation is quite cheap as well. So, I mean, the wars, as far as I can see, I'm in America, so I'm seeing, obviously, American coverage. But, I mean, the war does not appear to be going very well for Russia in real terms. I mean, it's what, 50, nearly 50.
I think, as you say, you're seeing too much American TV.
Well, I am, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's film. It's film. You're seeing it coming from the Ukrainian military, their videos. You're seeing the Russian videos. And I mean, the recent manoeuvres by Russia, particularly around Kyiv, is definitely them pulling back rather than advancing. So
I don't think Kiev was ever in their sights. But anyway, it's another story. I don't want to go into the actual things about the war. We're just talking about the economics. If I could just move on that. While this is all going on, everyone's standing still, Alf. And today I noticed a headline, which I think I'd like, because we're running out of time, and I want to cover this subject, taking us on to a new subject. It's been announced in the Herald today that, lo and behold, same as every other election when we were talking about it, there's going to be no referendum bill put through Holyrood before the election day on May the 5th. Now, call me an old cynic, Alf. I've seen this movie a few times. I'm of the opinion that right after this election in May, we'll not hear much about independence again until the UK general election in 2024. Or am I too cynical, Alf?
Well, I think most of us have come to the conclusion a long time ago that the SNP weren't really interested in independence. so this probably isn't really a surprise. And it's been done so many times before. So we're getting quite used to it. And that's why most of us a lot of us have moved on to other parties and so on. But I think that's the reality. Of course, a lot of us are not very keen on a referendum anyway, because if you've studied the demographics don't look good. And remember that people vote on the basis of cultural emotion, and that's related very much to their identity. So it's not so bad for many Scots, but not all Scots. But for people with other identities coming here, they really don't necessarily know what Scottish independence is about or why they should vote for it. In the sense, it's not about a change of government, and that's the thing. Politicians, the SNP as well, have portrayed it as a change in governance, but it's not. It's actually more fundamental than that. Liberation of a people is a totally different thing from electing a different political ideology. It's nothing to do with political ideologies of left or right. Liberation of a people and self-determination is about a people and a defined people. But the delayed census will tell us whether we have any chance of a yes vote in a future referendum. And that's what I'm waiting on, is the delayed census.
So is he. He's been waiting on that for about a year. He's been going on about it for about a year. We've come to the end, guys, as always, and it's always too soon. But I think what Alf's been saying there, Iain and Phil, we've given the people listening today several reasons why we need to vote for an independence party only, why we need independence. It's not just about ferries. It's about global economics. It's about geopolitics. It's about our institutions. It's about everything.
It's about controlling the resources of your own country.
And your own destiny.
Your people, your oil, your gas, your wind, whatever it happens, and then putting it to use for your own people. Not selling it off to foreign multinationals for peanuts.
Correct.
And that's what we've done with oil and gas. Here's a chance, thanks to Stuart, perhaps to start rebuilding a very important industry, the shipbuilding industry. Yep. And that's the way forward. We need to take risks. We need to, get out there and challenge across the world. I've been working in Estonia for 20 years. I've saw them move from a literally pauper economy, but by taking control and using the resources, what limited resources, by the way, in comparison to what Scotland's got to offer, they transformed their economy. They're now rapidly catching us. From, when I first went there, the average wage was $40 a day. They're now the most digitally advanced country in the world. That's what you can do with independence. And we need to do it soon.
But they don't know anything about Greek mythology. There you go. Those Estonians, eh? That's what Boris would say. Guys, as always, it's a pleasure, never a chore. I've enjoyed this. And to you folks out there, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have, and I hope it's given you some enlightenment, and anything that you want to hear, ask or say, get in touch. But till we see you again, please, please, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.